keeping with the theme of the show, the falling standard of goods of governance under democratic rule across Africa has made it to the front burner. No thanks to the raft of 9 military coups in just 3 years, with the latest in Gabon in Central Africa. Now, back in 2006, the Mo Ibrahim Foundation was set up with one focus: the critical importance of governance and leadership in Africa. Last year, this was the summary of the foundation's Good Governance Index. Now, during the week on the Arise Exchange show, anchor Bosun Omofaya, the legend himself, discussed this and more with Arise political editor Sumner Sambo. Let's take a listen to that great conversation.
From the 2022 review reports, we could see that the governance index has actually dropped. He talked about the issues of security there, and I think that's one critical area where the governance index has totally reduced drastically. Lots of insurgency and terrorism issues continue to affect governance, and as a result of deteriorating issues of insecurity comes with hunger, comes with poverty, and of course this makes eventually snowballs into worries in several societies where you see people being anxious, a lot of anxiety. People don't know what their future looks like. They don't trust their leaders. There's a huge trust deficit between those in political power and those that are being governed. And of course, when it has to do with the issues of insecurity as a result of fragile democracies that are unable to be governed properly by politicians, of course, the dark side is what we'll see that's happening today. Because just between 2020 and 2023 now, we've seen 8 coup attempts or successful coups in West and Central Africa. I mean, just right now, the Economic Community of Central African States and then the AU have been talking about the issues of the coup in Gabon, and of course, how this will further push down the governance index. Now, if you look at what Mo Ibrahim's governance index said, you see that the civic space is also shrinking because we do not give room for free speech, for equal participation of people in activities of governance. Lots of civil society groups are not allowed to thrive. Because of that, autocracy begins to come up. And then, of course, if you look at the Afrobarometer report, which came out last year, I mean, that institution, Afrobarometer, is also supported by the Mo Ibrahim Governance Organization. You will see that it is very clear there that a lot of Africans stated in the last survey that was done of about 34 countries, about 66% of them do not agree with any interruption of governance, whether in terms of coup or all of that. But if you look at the flip side of it, they said about 53% of them actually say that if a government that they elected becomes despotic, loses traction, and cannot provide the good governance that is being voted for, 53% of those Africans that were surveyed said that they are willing to allow the military to sack the despotic democratic government and see if after the sack, something better could happen. So this tells you how it has deteriorated. And of course, the fiscal aspect is what you and I know, that of course our economies are going down. Just a very few economies in Africa are really doing well. And of course, once people are unable to feed, clothe, and provide shelter for themselves, the next thing is to also contribute to the insecurity.
So, Sumner, I'm sure you remember in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and up to the early 90s, we had a raft of military administrations across African continent, Nigeria inclusive back then, of course, with a few spots of attempt at civilian democracy. But again, we've seen increasing number of civilian democracies on the continent over the past 2 decades or two, and folks are beginning to think that perhaps the days of military interventions in governance, political governance, are over. Now, what has gone wrong?
what has gone wrong is actually trust deficit between those that are in government and those that are being governed. A lot of politicians win elections, sometimes even through fraudulent wins, and they just think that by being in power that they assume the authority to kick everybody around. And of course, there are two sides of powers. The civilians who think that they are very powerful and wealthy enough to be able to capture state power through using money would also have the military to contend with, because the military doesn't have money, but of course they have the guns to actually stand and watch what is going on. And if they are dissatisfied and they gauge the mood of the nation and they feel how things are going, they will use the opportunity to sack the government. Don't forget, that's what former military head of state General Ibrahim Babangida has said, that the military then, when Nigeria was, in this hemorrhagic sort of situation, often waited after elections to read the mood of the nation, to see what is happening, and if indeed the citizens are not happy, it presents an opportunity for them to either strike or to sit down and assess the situation and see what will happen. So it is incumbent on the governments that have been elected by the people to deliver the dividends of democracy, as we like to call it in this part of the country. When people vote those into power, they should not see themselves as mini gods, because when you see state capture of power, of political power, and then that political power is not being used for the good of the people, there will be lots of murmuring. See what is happening in Gabon at the moment. The opposition are already saying that, look, they are commending the military for kicking out this Bongo dynasty and coming up, while one side of the opposition are also saying that, look, don't rule us, let's go back and recount the votes on last Saturday's election. So there's a lot of division as to the place of the military, because some of the citizens in Gabon, for example, may be rejoicing and all of that. But if you really look at it, you discover that the military actually has no role in governance, because they have not proved to be better than the civilians. Look at the general who's in charge of Gabon now, General Bryce Nguema himself. He's been accused of corruption, having houses abroad, and then of course there was a recent OCB survey by the US, one of the US organizations, when he was confronted as to why he had to have lavish houses abroad in France, in US and all of that. He said, well, that's a private matter, but having served as a general in the military, where did he get such kind of money? And the accusations have been there that he was corrupt himself. Well, he has sacked this dynasty now, and it looks like everyone is jubilating. But nonetheless, the civil society in that country must stand up and demand a transitional system that works out a timetable for the next government, because it cannot continue this way. And if we continue, it will be contagious. And that's why President Bola Tinubu is very right by saying that something has to be done. But that thing must start from the AU itself, because the AU has become a lame duck,
I was about to
not promoting democracy. What happened to the African peer review mechanism?
I wanted to ask you, and stepping that you're taking that straight out of my mouth, Sumner, when it comes to where is the position. You remember, I just talked about the 60s, 70s, and 80s. The African Union Organization, the OAU, the Organization of African Unity, as it was known then, was battling several military rulers across Africa. Then suddenly you've got almost everyone's return to civilian democracy. But suddenly we're back to that. Does it look like the African Union is still on top of its game as that central block for African country to ensure continuity and good governance, of not just ensuring that there is an election in which one civilian succeeds the other, but to ensure that there's a delivery of good economic governance. So this spate of military coup, do you see that as a dangerous one for socio-economic growth and development of Africa, really? Because right now we're talking about 6-7 countries out of 54 members of the AU in the black book, in the manner of speaking. So where does that leave the rest of us?
Well, the AU actually is a lame duck in this issue, and it's been contributing to all of this because it has refused to put in place its mechanism for tackling what I like to call dissident Democrats, people who engage in state capture because they are wealthy or because they are close to very wealthy people or because they are serving Western interests or other political powers outside of the countries or the continent, and as a result of that, they failed to put in place the mechanism. What happened to the African peer?
All right, if you want to see the rest of that awesome conversation and all the other conversations we have here on the Arise News channel, there it is. You go to our YouTube page, Arise News Channel Africa, www.youtube.com/Arise News Channel, and then click on playlists, and you'll see Business Week, you'll see the Arise Exchange, you'll see Global Business Report, you'll see everything on there. So, thank you so much for watching. You've been watching Business Week on Arise News. I'm Rusu Sodiri. Rolake will be back next week. Take care.